All right, I'm here with Wendy Meadows. She is a recovering divorce attorney, life coach, and the author of Sparkle and Grit. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for letting me be here today.
Yeah, excited to jump into you, especially with your background in divorce law, which I find just so unique. And I want to jump into a couple questions just to start off about divorce, because I work with a lot of men and a lot of couples that are considering divorce. Or usually, what happens with men is when they jump into my DMs on Instagram, it's usually at that moment. It's not like, hey, Joel, I want to proactively get ahead in my marriage and actually learn all the tools, the strategies to like make an amazing marriage. It's usually, I'm going through a divorce right now. Help me. Or my wife said she wants to separate. Help me. And that's usually the point.
Yeah.
Obviously, I would love to get to these guys before that. But what, in your opinion, just from having done this for so many years, what is the most common thread or the most common culprit that leads to divorce in general?
Communication breakdown, 100%. Because that one thing happens, and it's a domino effect in about 20 different ways, but people stop talking.
Have you ever, in your mediation process, because I know you mentioned this in your book and just, in your talks, is that a lot of people aren't clear even what they are arguing about by the time it gets to the divorce, and they
Yeah.
want to mediate and they want assets and it's money's involved and the kids are involved. Have you ever been able to reverse somebody's divorce decision just by getting them to communicate? Because you said, guys, listen, the problem here is communication, and that's what you help them do when it comes to mediation. Has it ever reversed just by any chance?
Sometimes, like probably a handful of times, or I always ask in every when I was a divorce attorney, if I had a client sitting in front of me, if when I mediate, I'm like, is there any hope of saving this marriage? If I see a glimmer, like I will grab onto it, I will say it, I will like address the elephant in the room, because if I can save a marriage, I much rather that than help the parties divorce. So that's number one. But with the communication part, it's like so micro and it's happening so often. And I saw it happen in my own marriage, like back in, I don't even remember what year, 2015. And it's just like, it's like the turning away when you instead of you could have turned in. And it's happening all the time. It's like you're really frustrated and annoyed at your spouse. And instead of just having the conversation, like you go upstairs and watch TV, or you play with your kids instead, or you go on too many girls' nights, or men join the golf league, the bowling league, what have you, and they're just absent. And then there's not even a communication breakdown. It's like absence of any communication whatsoever. But to answer your question, or when they're here in my office, yeah, a lot of times they don't even know what they want often, or what they can even ask for in a divorce. I see that more often than not.
Yeah, and I think I always tell guys too is that a lot of times your argument, whatever the argument is, it's very surface level. Like
Yeah.
the argument has nothing to do with actually the root cause of whatever the issue is. But most of us never get through to that because we're just talking with surface level stuff. Like, you didn't put the dishes away, you didn't do that. It's like, yeah, but underneath all of that is usually like one of my human needs is not being met, and that's why I'm angry. But we
Yeah.
can't even get there. And I'm sure for you, it's really unpeeling that and getting them back to that. Like, what are your core human needs and what do you really want? And most of us have never asked that until they meet you and it's time to start separating assets and divorce, right?
Right. And I think the one thing that gets really where my women clients get frustrated, or I see like wives and moms especially get frustrated, is in the divorce process. And as mom and dad, usually when mom and dad separate, now dad wants time with the kids and he wants visitation and he wants access and he wants to do all these things. And then he wants to come to the doctor's appointments and dentist appointments and do things that maybe he had not done before. I'm not
Mhm.
saying all dads. I'm just saying this particular case I've seen many times where they follow very traditional roles. Mom does all the kid things, dad works, and but then now when they're divorced and now dad wants all of this time, and then dad starts doing all the things that he should have been doing during the marriage. Had he done all of those things that he now wants to do, and he's going to pay $100,000 at least to do them, right? Then now she's like, well, why didn't you just do this before? Like, had this turned on 5, 10 years ago, we wouldn't be in this position. Like, that is the number one theme I see in a lot of my custody cases. Like,
So, yeah.
number one.
That is so good. And it's usually, again, it's a wake up call for men. And that's a big cry that I say is that we are at a leadership crisis for men. And if they were only leading from the beginning, then they would never be running into these problems from the first place. Like, how many times did your wife tell you, I wanted this, I wanted this? And you're like, yeah, yeah, I'll get to it one day, someday. And it's like, she can only do that so much before there's a breaking point, you know?
Yeah. Like, we want and need a partner. We want
Ooh.
someone that we can say and like my husband and I, like we do a pretty good job of always dividing up kid roles and economic roles, all the different roles. But like we want someone to do stuff with us. We don't want all of that emotional burden on us. It's too much. It's too hard. We go
Mm.
crazy. And my moms or my friends that I see that don't have any help from their husbands, like they are the ones that those are the couples that fight the most from what I see.
Yeah.
It's
That
like,
I wanted to ask you too, if someone is considering getting a divorce,
mhm.
is there any advice you would give them? And what I'm asking when I say that, and I think it's to your point which you asked before. My wife always, when we work with couples, she always says, I really want you to feel what it's going to feel like to actually live a divorced life. Because in the moment, it's just anger, 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 resentment. I hate you. I can't stand you. And it's just an emotional reaction. Like, I want a divorce. But have you actually sat in there? Have you actually sat and lived in the feeling of what it was going to feel like to be there? It's a lot easier to say, I'm just going to get a divorce, but to actually feel emotionally like the drop offs, the economics, the just actually, this is it. Like, there's no turning back from this. And I think you said one of your questions you asked them, is there any hope? Is that the question? Or is there something else you'd say, if you're really considering this, like sit in it? Well, what would you tell people?
If what I would tell people, like if I got to them before they were like pre-divorce contemplation or contemplating pre-divorce, I would also say you cannot make any assumptions. Like any assumption that of what you have, you can chuck that out the window. Because people often, by the time they come to mediation, they assume certain things about what the custody schedule will be, what the asset division will be, how much they're going to pay attorneys, and they'll go and meet with attorneys. An attorney might say, okay, it's a $5,000 to $10,000 retainer. So again, that person's thinking the divorce is only $5,000 to $10,000. I'm seeing across the board divorces cost $100,000. Like if it goes to trial, et cetera, at least per person, because
No,
unfortunately,
hold on. Time out, Wendy. 100,000, because I know you're on the East Coast, like New York, right?
Maryland, but yeah, like 4 hours from New York.
So, but pretty wealthy. These are wealthy clientele, or no? You're saying just in general, it's 100,000.
I see attorneys like, and this is even the case before, like 10, 20 years ago, attorneys would wait to get paid when the house got sold. So there's a lot of people hold a lot of equity in their house and they're excited about that. It goes away to pay attorneys. Or like clients have retirement assets and then they sometimes have to use retirement assets to pay attorneys, right? And then, we say, there's sometimes we'd have to say, like, look, this is the time you're asking for a loan from mom or dad, from like grandma, grandpa, whoever, and they get the loan. But again, it's like a loan or a gift from a grandparent, and like that means you're not getting to do it towards your kids' education or anywhere else. And the good attorneys out there will say to our clients, we'll say, look, do you want to pay for your kids' college education or mine? Because the way you're going right now, you're paying for my kids' college, not yours. Like that's a phrase a lot of us do use.
Okay, so the average divorce, and you're not talking about just in wealthy California or New York. You're saying just in general for lawyer fees, just lawyer fees. I'm not talking about dividing assets. I'm talking about giving the lawyer money. You're saying hundreds of thousands of dollars?
Litigated. So if it goes to trial, but like meaning, so
Gotcha.
Are you familiar with like the arc of like beginning to end of trial and how that works and looks like?
Being a former police officer, I'm familiar, but but that's a different, I don't work in divorce court. So that's
Right.
obviously a little bit different, nuanced there.
So let's pretend a case is definitely going to trial because people want their day in court because that is so important to them, right? They need everyone to know how awful dad was or how awful mom was, and this person cheated or this person failed to get their kid to school on time 5 times in the last quarter, like kind of stupid stuff, but they have to have their day in court. By the time of filing till you get to court, it might take 2 years. It might take 2 years to actually get your day in court. That means you have this attorney on retainer that your email, anytime you can't communicate with your spouse, because then you start hiding behind your attorney, you email your attorney, the attorney emails the other attorney, that one goes to the party. So it's a really terrible game of telephone that keeps going on and on and on. It costs thousands of dollars a month. So it adds up. And then trial, let's pretend it's a 4-day trial. So 4 times 10 hours a day, because like you're prepping as well. So that's 40 hours at least of trial times like $400 an hour. A lot of attorneys. Okay, I'm not doing my math wrong. I said 40. I'd say 40 times
hours.
100. That's $16,000 just for trial. And then trial is usually as long as trial prep. That's another so we're at 30,000. but plus the 2 years of attorney fees before that. We haven't even gotten into all the other things, but it's really
Wow.
expensive.
Last question on that though. How often are people actually going to trial though? Is it that often? I assume mostly it just happens outside of court, mediation.
A handful. I would say probably 5 to 10% of cases go to trial, maybe 5. But
So then
often,
you're still looking at like 50 grand though in litigation fees, probably.
yeah, because you get all the way close to trial, and then your attorney says, "Hey, I need another $20,000. We're going to trial," and you're like, "Well, I can't pay that." And everyone's like, "Well, I guess it's time to settle the case." And then people might have more involved settlement conversations because they don't want to spend another 20 grand on their attorney.
Wow.
Yeah.
Same. Last question on divorce, and then I want to wrap. I want to start talking about what you're up to and all the exciting, because I know this is not your bread and butter anymore. You're a recovering divorce attorney. I just had some very curious questions. I want to get into Sparkle and Grit and why you wrote it, but just any, having gone through it yourself, I have 2 kids, and I'm always thinking, man, how could I create a more conscious divorce that also impacts the children the least? Any advice that you would give parents or anybody that's listening?
You mean like even I was a kid going through divorce? Because I'm still in my marriage. We're still good. We're still happy.
No, as a child, you said you came from a divorced home. I'm just curious, knowing all that you know and seeing couples that probably had a better or more conscious breakup than the average. Is there any advice or you would say to anybody or parents like to minimize the impact of divorce on their kids?
Yep. Well, there's 2 pieces and they kind of go together. Number 1, never trash the other parent ever. Even if it's something small, like, oh, your dad was never here on time, or, oh, your dad was always at work late. Like even like the comments that aren't like, oh, he's a scumbag, but still making comments about the other parent, unless they're super nice or super helpful, or, hey, your dad's coming today at 6:00 to pick you up. Cool. Like keep it clean. And the other thing is the kids don't need to know the truth. So many times, like, and I represent a lot of kids now too. Like, so let's pretend one of the parents did cheat, like mom cheated, right? And mom left to be with Joe Schmo. And the dad wants to like really tell the child, okay, well, she went to Joe Schmo and that's why this happened. And this is why we are divorced. Like, that's not going to get him anywhere. The kids don't need to know the truth. It does nothing but hurt them. And truthfully, from what both you and I just talked about before, wife went off with Joe Schmo, not because necessarily she fell in love with Joe Schmo, but because they had like years and years and years of communication breakdown. And Joe Schmo was the first person to pay attention and listen to her. Right. Totally. So the kids do not need to know the truth.
Yeah. Amazing. That was so helpful, Wendy. Thank you. All right. Let's change gears here and talk about Sparkle and Grit. Again, you have a very successful career being a lawyer. Like, who doesn't like that? Like, man, I think of a lawyer, man, so much money, life is good, but you reach this breaking point or crisis point or an aha moment. Although in your book, you say it wasn't an aha moment. I think those are some big shifts, but what for you was the impetus of saying, all right, I'm sick of doing this type of law. I want to shift gears, and everything that you put in this book, Sparkle and Grit, is kind of outlined the whole process and how you help your clients now, achieve that same freedom. Talk about that.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think I had an aha moment in the book, but now since I wrote the book a year ago and I've been asked a lot of questions, I'm seeing it more clearly, like what it was. Around 2016, 2017, I was like, I don't know if I want to be a divorce attorney forever, because you bring all of the stress home with you. And when you are in constant conflict all day, like emails and phone calls and like fighting with other attorneys or your client, you actually fight a lot with your own client.
You mentioned a lot of yelling happens amongst clients and the attorneys. It just sounds like a really stressful life of people yelling on you on the phone and going, okay, and then hanging up. And it sounds terrible.
And friends of mine, my friends would yell at me, and then my clients would yell at me, and then I would yell back, and I was not the person who I wanted to be, but I would bring that, I would still be like all like buzzed up. And then that's how I treated my husband. It's how I treated my kids. And like, when I'm getting constant conflict, emails, calls, whatever, I bring that home. And I'm like, I don't like this. And then around the same time, I accidentally fell into health and wellness coaching, just kind of happened on accident. And I was spending the first hour of every morning building women up. And I was having a really fun time doing it. Like they say, oh my gosh, like I lost this many pounds, or I actually worked out, or I made healthy choices, or I feel so much better. I sleep. And like, that was like so fun, like keyboarding with all these women in the morning. And then several years later, I was cross-examining this woman on the stand, and I represented the husband. I actually really like him a lot. I still like him a lot. He was a fabulous client. But the first time I ever had a conversation with his wife, was me cross-examining her on the stand. And it just felt icky. Like it felt
Mm.
icky. It was like in an open courtroom, like me questioning her parenting, questioning her spending choices. Like it just, like, this is not who I'm supposed to be. Like, no, like I felt like my skin wasn't mine and I didn't like it. And I didn't like playing that part. And I'm like, okay, this, you can't do this much longer. Like you have to like pivot and go somewhere else. And so I did. And that's what led to Sparkle and Grit.
Yeah. Talk about just the title and the duality of Sparkle and Grit for people that don't understand it, unless you've kind of read it, you understand it. But you mentioned Sparkle and Grit, living a technicolor life by finally finding balance, escaping monotony, and beating burnout.
Yeah.
Why that duality? Why do you think it's necessary?
Because you need both. So Sparkle is that hint of inspiration lying in your path, designed to wake you up. So for me, my sparkle was, oh, I see someone doing online coaching. That looks cool. Maybe I'll take a baby step and look into it. Okay, maybe I'll sign up for this. Okay, maybe I'll reach out to people. And it felt good and it felt happy. And it was like a very glittery time of my life, right? But like in order to grow that business and find other business, I also had to take gritty steps and I also had to show up. I can't be like, oh, I'm going to be here and it's sparkly and it's fun, but I'm not actually going to do anything. Like grit is, and I don't think grit is some big, awful, terrible thing that sounds like insurmountable, but it's just like taking a baby step every day in the right direction. And with those both, like somebody would say it's the masculine, the feminine, right? The sparkle feminine, grit masculine, and the duality there. Like that's how we're going to achieve anything that we actually want to set out and achieve. Like those two together, you can do it. And it gives you a really easy framework. And it's like, I've even had friends like tell me, like, for example, she read my book as she was on her way to Arizona, super afraid of heights, right? Super afraid of heights. But she's like, the sparkle of that, she's like, I want to go on these cool hikes. I want to see like the sights, but like, I'm terrified to get to like the edge of the cliff. But that's the grit. For me, it's like the grit is like getting close to the edge of the cliff and actually like peeking over, like literal baby steps. So it's just, you can apply it to like pretty much anything, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Talk about just grit a little bit more, because I always think of grit. Anytime I think of the word grit now, and it's, I don't want to say it's getting overused. It's become so popular since Angela Duckworth TEDx talk, right? She talked about grit, but you look at grit slightly different than the way she does. Can you kind of explain, which I like your definition a little bit better, but yeah, talk about how you see grit in a different context, because it gets overused by so many people now. Oh, you got to be gritty, you got to be tenacious, you got to work hard. It's like, okay, yeah, I know that, but
right. I think when people think of grit, they think you grind, hard, hard, hard. You stay up super late. You don't give yourself any rest. Like you just go, go, go at the risk of your health, your family's health, and everybody else. Like you are just like hardcore, like David Goggins style, right?
Gary Vee told me to do that. Sleep when I'm dead, right? Post every day on every social media channel. That's grit.
Like, no. And I thought about recently, like, oh, if I could write the book again, should I even call it like Sparkle, Grit, and Rest? Because I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and maybe it's like a chapter I'll send out to my followers or something. But no, like grit, I look at grit is like breaking it down, teeny tiny baby steps, and like taking the baby steps, like persevering towards your goal, like doing a little bit every day, like not so it's so scary and insurmountable, but that you are moving the needle. And maybe you move the needle a teeny tiny step one day, and maybe it's like ginormous, like another particular week because you're super on. But it shouldn't be to make it. What I found with clients, if I give them a goal that is so big, how do you eat an elephant? They're like, I don't know how to eat a freaking elephant. But it's like, oh, okay, one bite at a time. I got it. Like, okay, like this is what we do first. And we just keep moving along.
Something else that you mentioned I thought was really interesting is you said, don't be bored with doing the mundane. And you tied that in with grit, which I really like, because it reminded me of, I can't remember who I interviewed. We were talking about athletes and like the best athletes in the world. You want to know the guys that are on the podium in the Olympics? They're the guys that never get bored with doing the basics. They hit the same swing. They shoot the same jump shot every freaking day. And they don't get bored saying, hey, you got to go back and train. You got to go back and practice. Like they actually just fall in love with the process and doing the mundane, which is really hard to do.
I think it becomes a part of you after a while, right? If you keep doing it, it becomes a part of you. You don't even know how not to do it anymore.
One of the things also, Wendy, that you mentioned in your book, I thought was really really cool was you had a friend, you're talking about running,
Mhm.
and I can't remember, you were
Tina.
training for a race, I believe.
Yeah, Tina.
Yeah, and you were kind of yelling at her like, "Hey, we're going too fast. Like, I'm gonna burn out. Like, what are you doing?" But she just smiled and looked at you, and you guys just kept running. And I thought, wow, that's so fascinating. It was like a big turning point for you, though, when you think about health. And I always think about mentors and coaches and people that lift us up and kind of do the same thing. We just smile and say, "You got this," but but I am gonna keep this pace, and I think you can stay up with me.
Mhm.
And most of us don't do what you did. They just say, "You're going too fast. I give up." Right. But for you, you didn't do it. And really, the interesting thing I see about that is you entered a new paradigm. Like, oh, wait, that was something I never thought I could do, but I did. And I did keep that pace. So I just think about how I almost think some of that grittiness was almost accidental, right? You had someone who pushed you in a way that you thought, I didn't even know I could achieve that. But that's the power in coaches and having people, I think,
Yeah.
give you some of that grit, right?
I think so. And it's also because I had mad respect for this particular person. Like, I respected her. I did not want to let her down. And it wasn't that I was worried she would judge me. I just like, I wanted to do well in her eyes as well. Like, I wanted to like make her proud, right? Sort of like you would a coach, same sort of
Yeah.
thing. Like, I wanted to make her proud. And it, I don't know if it was like some other Joe Schmo. I don't know. I don't know if I would have done the same thing, but with her, I'm like, oh shoot, Bettina's telling me to do this. Okay, I better do it. And I bet you I would do it again. Like if she texted me like, okay, Wendy, it's time for us to do a half marathon. I'd be like, I probably would say yes.
Yeah, but how, I think, again, rising to the standards, right? And sometimes we don't even know what our standards are or what we're capable until we have people, we hire coaches and mentors that can push us and make us a little bit more gritty. And I think that that was an aha for me of like almost a roundabout way. Maybe you can't find the grit, or maybe doing baby steps every day. It sounds easy enough,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes we just don't make it. So having someone who can hold us accountable, shed light on those blind steps, and bring us to raise our standards so that we can raise ourselves. I just love that.
Yep. Yep.
You mentioned also a lot about being on autopilot. And I think a lot of us get stuck on autopilot, right? Just like your life. And I think about it all the time too. It's like, what a great life. What are you talking about? You're an elite lawyer. Like, not many people can be. You make great money. But you get into this routine, right? And you mention it.
Mm-hmm.
Go to work, get up in the morning, you do your workout, you drop the kids off, you pick the kids up, you take them to practice. It's the same thing. Then you veg out when you come home, you Netflix and chill, and you rinse and repeat the cycle. And you do that for the next 30 years. And then you retire and so-called live the good life when you retire. One of the big things for me was like, I don't want to wait until I retire to start living the good life. Why can't I just start living it right now? But so many of us get caught in that cycle of just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. How do you think people can stop, take a moment, get off that cycle, get off that hamster wheel and pivot? Because even if they are aware of it, it's scary to pivot.
It's like for them, it's like going back to like, okay, find that one thing. Like for me, like right now, again, I will admit, like the book came out, September? And then around January, February, March, recently this year, I felt blah again. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? I wrote a whole book. Like here I am. And now I'm feeling monotonous again. Like, how did I get here? Like, this makes no sense. But I'm like, okay, you wrote a book, Wendy, you have the tools, you know what to do. I'm like, well, how can I make life sparkly again? Like, what can I do? What's the new thing? Because I do like chasing new things. I'm Enneagram 7. So like new things excite me. And I'm like, what can I do? I'm like, well, I miss running. Right. And I miss running with people. And I need like part of like my sparkliness and breaking out of my rut is to find other people that I can hang out with and be with and building community. I'm like, okay, it's time to find a running community. So I found one and it was okay. Like it was nice, but it wasn't quite what I was looking for. Like I enjoyed the people. It just wasn't 100% the right fit, but I didn't give up. This is where the grit happens. I'm like, okay, Wendy, you need to find your people. Like you need to find something where you're outside and you're running and you're with people. And like, you need a disturbance to the routine or else you're going to be bored again. Right. And I'm like, okay. Then I saw an email for a trail running group close by me. I'm like, awesome. Because my husband really does not like when I run the trails alone, which I understand. He gets very nervous. And I'm like, I can do it. Who cares? I'll be fine. He's like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I don't know, like punch him. He's like, you don't know what you're doing. So I found this group and it's been fabulous. We run twice a week. I love the coach. I'm learning new things. I'm being pushed outside my comfort zone in like other new ways. And I feel I have not felt this good. And I have to attribute it to that. Like going outside, doing something different, literally being outside, being with people, making new friends. And like, even thinking back, like I haven't felt that same boredom in the last like 6 weeks that I was feeling beforehand. So like, I think that was the catalyst. So for me, I would say, or for anybody listening, okay, when you were young, 13, 14, 15, 16, right when you first started feeling those hints of freedom, like what was your hint of freedom? Like some of my clients, it might be like painting, drawing, art. Some of my clients, it is running, or it's, I can't, like maybe it's biking or something else, but it's finding that again, tuning into that person, like, okay, what can I borrow from her or him? They first were feeling freedom when, how can I do that again now in a good, safe way?
That's so good. And thanks for being vulnerable and just sharing, again, all the success that you've had. And then, hey, even Wendy Meadows gets in a rut every now and then. And
Yeah.
it's like asking yourself those same powerful questions. Okay, what is going on? Why am I feeling this way? What's missing? Having some of that awareness piece. And then I love how you said almost like finding your new edge, right?
Mhm.
Let me find my new edge of discomfort and go there, live there for a little bit. And now you're back. You're back in that flow state again.
And it's going to happen again. Like, of course it's going to
100%
happen.
it is. It might happen next year or it might happen 10 years from now. We don't know, right?
Like, crap, like really again? I'm like, okay, well, what's calling me? Like, what's calling my name? Where do I need to be heading next? And I think that's a sign of the sign too. Like, okay, something's not working. I need to break out again.
Yeah. And in your book, you mentioned anchors. Talk a little bit about the and anchors for you and why it's just so powerful. And I think why everyone should start to adapt some type of anchor in their life.
Yeah. And when I talk about like anchors in the book, it was, I think, in the context of a morning routine. And
Correct.
the number one piece of advice I have for people with children, I'm like, who, like, anytime I give a speech, I'm like, okay, who here has kids? Like, half the audience raises their hand. I'm like, my number one takeaway for you is like, you have to wake up before your kids, period. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. Like, if you don't wake up before your kids, you're starting the day on defense. You have like, you're never going to have like your brain in your head as good as you will have it in the morning. Because by the time nighttime falls, like you got nothing. Like you're running on empty. And so I talk about anchors. Like I don't expect people to, and I think people like refrain from waking up early or starting morning routine because they think it has to be perfect, right? Like they have to wake up 2 hours before the kids, meditate, run, work
Whole
out,
bunch.
read, do all, like do 25 million things. So instead I tell them like one anchor, get one anchor, whether it's like, but no matter what, waking up before the kids, if you're a parent, right? But maybe it's exercise, maybe it's meditation, maybe it's reading, maybe it's like meal prepping for the week, but one thing that you can consistently do for X amount of time to like make sure you're getting out of bed and like you can hinge on that one thing and then other things can build after that, but just one at first.
Yeah. So critical. I'm a big ritual routine kind of person. I know very successful people that could care less. They don't have a morning routine. But for me, I think to your point, at least I know for me, if I take care of Joel in the morning, I'm a much better father, husband, and all those things because
Yeah.
I feel like I took care of me and I'm ready to go. So
Yeah.
couldn't agree more with you.
Mm-hmm.
For you though, again, you have such an eclectic background, being an attorney, being a coach, being an author. And if anyone's listening to this, some of them might be like, well, that's great that it worked for you, Wendy. Do you have like just one piece of advice that you'd say, it doesn't matter who you are, if you're a human, this one technique or this one shift will work in anybody's life?
Yep, I do. And it's a resource I have. It's called the Pause Time Playbook. And essentially what it is every morning to do this exercise before you can, and if you're not actually going to fill it out in the little playbook I have for you to like think about this before you even get out of bed, but it goes as follows, because I believe you can reverse engineer your day in this way. And this works for everybody. And I can give you examples of where it's worked in like all different areas of my life. But when you wake up, and often when people wake up, the first thing they grab is right their phone and they start social mediaing and looking at everything else. But before you do anything, to think about, oh, where in my, like scanning the day, like scanning the calendar of your day, what is the big event? Like what is going to require my attention the most? Like, so today it might be the podcast, right? Like, oh, I'm going to be on Joel Evans' podcast, right? Okay, that's the big event. And then thinking, okay, well, who do I want to be on that podcast? I want to be confident. I want to be articulate. I want to be like thinking about who I want to be. I want to be energetic, etc. And then think of and make that into an I am statement. Like, so when you're there, you are already that person and you don't even have to think about it. You don't have to think about being nervous or scared or sweating or stumbling over your words. And then in that way, I find you can pause time. Because when you go back and then reflect on what happened before, you're like, you see it as this inside out memory ball because you thought about it before you're in the ball. Then you're like in the ball actually happening. And then when you go back and reflect on the memory, like it's even more. You say, oh, who was Wendy during that? Oh, she was confident, articulate, and high energy, right? Because I decided to be her. So I believe this tool anyone can use for any sort of thing. And the ways I've used it, like I used it in court. I'll give you two of my favorite examples, my court example and my husband example. So my court example is, and this is this was my last case, my last litigation case where I represented mom in this case. And my big event of the day wasn't just trial. It was cross-examining dad. And dad was a questionable character, I would say, and had posted some really awful things on his Facebook. And I had downloaded like really, really off-color jokes about young women. And he was trying to get custody of his young 13-year-old child. So like, and they were really bad, like really super duper, like X-rated bad. Ooh. And my goal, it wasn't just like my big event just wasn't trial. It wasn't just cross-examination. My big event was getting in these pieces of paper into evidence. And I said, okay, well, who does Wendy need to be? Well, Wendy needs to be unwavering and unflappable, right? That's who Wendy needs to be in that moment. And even though the trial is a pretty scary experience, like when you're there, it's nerve wracking, right? Like your energy's going crazy. So
even for an established, like you've been doing this for like over a decade, 15 years, like even then it's still a little nerve wracking, huh?
Yeah. Cause if you lose your, like same thing, probably with public speaking, right? If you have zero butterflies before you get on stage or before you start anything, then it's like, you've lost some of your edge, you know, like you can feel confident, but
yeah, no, I was just curious. Yeah. And I know from having testified many times over a 15-year career, I can totally speak to that aspect. You know, you're always preparing for the work. You're always preparing for what they might try to trip you up with. Eventually I got to a place of being pretty darn, like you said, I was always a little bit nervous, but I always, you know, prepared myself enough and was confident. And for me, court was just a show. Like everything I did, I prepared for. And now it was expressing it in a way that it was a play. It's a theater. It's a show in that sense. Like I am performing as I'm telling what I need to get across, right? Like I might have written it down, right? I might be an amazing officer, but you cross-examining me could make me look to be shifty. You could make me look bad if I'm not playing my role, is what I'm saying. And I'm showing up to what I'm not faking anything. I'm showing up like you're talking about, showing up.
Right.
Yeah. So keep going. Sorry, I cut you off.
So I was there and like I have the papers and I'm nervous and I'm like, and I know he's going to object because my opposing counsel too was a piece of work. I'll say that. So like I'm trying to get him in. Objection. I'm like, I knew this would happen. I'm like, Your Honor, blah, 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 blah. She's like, okay, overruled. Try and get him in again. Objection. Like, Your Honor, like again, like saying why my evidence should get, you know, why it's relevant. And old lawyer Wendy or old lawyer Wendy or like baby lawyer Wendy would have probably sat down after the second objection being like, sorry, client, we're not going to get this in. I don't want to piss off the judge. Because that's the other thing. We have to be really careful. We're not making the judge angry or upset and like driving them nuts. And I tried to get in for a third time. Objection. Like, oh my God. So I stood up, like I said, I think I said in the book, like an angry chihuahua or something. And like, and said all the things. And then finally overruled. It's admitted, like, let's move on. So I got it in, but only because as I was thinking about it, I'm unwavering. And I could tether to that. Like I made the core memory that morning before I was even there. I could tether to it and be her in the moment without even worrying about all the other things I was going to be. And now I have that as a solidified moment. So if I ever go to court again, like which I will if I'm representing the child, etc., who does Wendy need to be? Again, unwavering, unflappable, and I can draw from that experience. And it's weird. It's like, I call it the Pause Time Playbook because it really feels like when you're in the moment, like time is paused. You're like, oh, wait, I have a playbook. I know how to do this. I've been here before in my memories this morning, and I just have to like do what I did then. The second example that I super love was this like 4 years ago. My husband was going on a guy's trip for the weekend. And I wrote down big event of the day. Like I just had like Zooms and meetings and that sort of thing, but nothing like huge. My big event of the day though was saying goodbye to him. Like, okay, he's leaving for Ocean City. Like, who do I want to be? I'm like, I want to be a kind and loving wife. Because sometimes I can be, if I'm in the middle of work and working and he was leaving midday, I could be dismissive at times, maybe a little. Been accused of that. Like, well, not accused. He would never actually say that, but I know.
Yeah.
So several hours later, I was like in the middle of an email and I don't like breaking my train of thought because that's really like frustrating and annoying to me. But then I saw him coming down the stairs and my knee-jerk reaction was like, I was like, I'd say, bye, hun, have fun. Like this is what I wanted to say. And I said, no, like, no, Wendy, that's not what you said you were going to do. Like, what does a kind and loving wife do? So like I stepped away from my email, like I walked away from my computer, walked into the other room, made him take his like duffel bag off. And he's looking at me like I'm nuts. He was like, what's going on? Not like used to it. And I'm like, no, I want to like, goodbye. Like, I hope you have a great time with your friends, blah, 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 blah. And I gave him this hug and I leaned into him. Like, it wasn't just like a hug, like, love you, bye. It was like,
Yeah.
I leaned my whole weight of my body against him. So I can still feel it now. I can still feel it today. And it's just like, God forbid anything ever happened to him, like ever, like I can still feel that hug because I was able to pause time. Like I thought about who I wanted to be in that moment. I'm like, okay, this is who I needed to be. And then I reflected on it again, like the next day. So I have that with me for the absolute rest of my life. And when he read about it in the book, he was like, I remember that hug too. So like that was a way going like full circle, what we talked about in the beginning. Like it was like all those little pieces where we started to actually make time for each other and turn into each other and tune into each other and who the other person needed us to be too. That's how we, for a while there, like things weren't great in 2015. Yeah, 2015-ish, but like we were able to like bring the path back together, right? That way.
Yeah, I love that. I also like the part about the reflection piece. There's a lot I'll do similar to what you do, but I don't do a good job of reflecting because by the end of the day, I'm just burnt and I just don't have the bandwidth to want to do it. But I really like that reflection piece because I think it solidifies things in your brain and it really kind of embeds that memory and goes, oh yeah, that was a really good thing. Do more of that. And your brain likes that and it'll anchor to that and do more of it. And so I really like how you've added that into it. That's so key.
But my trick is too, I don't do it at night. I do it the next morning. And that's what I have like in like the little, like the resource, right? Like the next morning I say, why was yesterday great? So it gives you time to go back and look and it might be something else, but, and also where could have I done better? Because we need to reflect on that too. I think every day we need to look, there's something that 99% of the time, there's something that we could have done better the day before.
100%. I like that idea of the morning. I do a lot of morning work too. That's when I'm the best. So that's actually a good way to anchor it in and tie it into the morning routine, that reflection piece. That's so good.
There's no way I'm going to do it at night. I know myself well enough. Like every day I'm like, oh, I'm going to go for a walk. Like I'll work out in the morning and I'm going to walk like an extra like 40 minutes at night because that'll be great to get to my steps. No, it just, with the kids and everything else and like getting dinner on the table, like this nighttime stuff right now. I'm not in a season of life where nighttime stuff is that possible.
Yeah, same. By 9:00, I'm pretty wiped. So, and same thing with the kids and stuff. By the time I have a lot of aspirations after I put them to bed, but I promise you none of those things happen.
We're in an amazing spot where they're putting me to bed right now. So that is a fun turning point of
parenthood. Boy, I have to ask how that happens. I mean,
it's great.
Wendy, I wanted to ask you, that was so good. Any exciting projects or anything that you're working on right now that you can share with us?
Exciting projects. So I just finished the free resource, the Pause Time Playbook, just so people can have that and see how that works. Like it's a 7-day email series and PDF like handout. It's sort of like the journal that I have as well that goes with Sparkle and Grit. But other projects this summer, I'm enjoying myself. I'm having a lot of fun. I'm trying to get on more stages to speak more to audiences because I have a lot of fun doing that. But I guess the next big thing coming is this fall. I'm launching the Sparkle and Grit Academy, which is like group coaching, like following the book.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a lot. That's a lot to talk about. You just dismissed it like it wasn't much going on, but you do have a lot going on. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff. I want to start wrapping things up, but just anything I didn't ask you that you wish I had.
I think the only question I would say, like going back to the divorce piece, because this matters a lot to me because I really don't like people spending all of their money on attorneys. Like and a lot of my good friends are attorneys, but I think unfortunately there's some attorneys out there who don't know what they're doing. So I'd say if any people contemplating divorce are listening to the podcast, I would number one, make sure they're looking at the different options like mediation or collaborative law first, because those are ways of resolving your matter that are going to be not only save you money, but also save like the drama and save the emotional turmoil. Like if you do it in those ways, most likely. If you are going to get a divorce, or if you are going to hire a lawyer and you're like, I want trial, etc., the bulldog litigator is not necessarily who you want, right? The bulldog litigator is just going to make things worse. And if you start seeing your spouse all of a sudden acting different, or you're hearing things that are different, or you're getting letters and emails that are like crazy, your spouse probably didn't authorize them. So I think they should keep that in mind as well, right? Or they're hiding behind their attorney. And then if you're going to, as you're choosing your attorney, make sure you choose someone that family law is 99% of what they do. They're not family law, personal injury, criminal defense, driver's accident, et cetera, that you're really choosing somebody who primarily does family law, because I've seen a lot of attorneys try and dabble in it, and it's really not something you can dabble in. So number one, like making sure you're choosing the right process for you, and that you're choosing the right attorney that is not going to just cost you lots of money and not know what they're doing.
Yeah, great stuff. One last question on that divorce piece that I was just thinking of. If someone is going through the process, and I always try to remind my guys is that, listen, you guys had a lot of good times and a lot of good memories, and it is what it is. It happened. But I always remind them, can you show up and be the best damn husband to this woman who you're getting divorced with? Can you still show up? Can you still show up and be that person? And I say, can you show up in this marriage and in a separation to your kids and be the best damn father to the kids from a divorced perspective? Can you still do that? Because a lot of people are like, it's over, this is how it is. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be. It's just you're choosing that to be your paradigm.
Yep.
Do you ever kind of tell clients, or have you seen clients that have successfully mediated without there being tons of money? Have you seen a common thread of like John Smith over here and Ann Smith, they both had that mindset of like, we are going to keep peace and we prioritize the kids or something. I don't know. What's like the common thread where you see them successfully separating?
And it's my favorite client who I miss so much. So my favorite client I had when I was a divorce attorney was, I would call it like the CEO man. It was like the guy, actually, not the woman. It was the guy who was able to make business decisions, but still understand what his wife brought to the marriage and what the mom brought to the marriage, and wanted to treat her fairly. So the guys that came into my office and said, okay, like, we're getting divorced. I don't want to be here, but here's where we are. This is, of course she's getting alimony, like in some of the alimony, of course she's getting, because a lot of these cases too, of like, especially if they were making gajillions of dollars and mom was like at home more, of course she's getting alimony. Of course the kids are going to get what they need. And this talked in terms of schedules, not overnights and not numbers. Cause I always say children aren't pizza, right? They're actually like looking, because people say, oh, I want 50-50 custody. I'm like, your kids aren't pizza. What is 50-50 custody? 50-50. It should be 50-50. I'm like, no, like, what schedule works for your child? I don't know. Every other weekend? Well, that's not 50-50 custody. Let's actually talk about what schedule works for your kid. And just like, no, like they want to treat their spouse fairly. And I don't have to explain, okay, even though your pension or your retirement, whatever is in your name, you were married to your wife that whole time, she is going to get her equitable share, probably half, right? So like, I don't even have to have these big discussions. They know it already, and they've accepted it, and they can look at it as a business decision and say, okay, I'll recover. But like those particular men that like want to treat their wife fairly, want to be a good dad, they're not trying to stick it to anybody. They're not trying to be an ass. Maybe they're a little bit of an ass during the marriage, but they're trying to apologize for that. Like those are some of my favorite clients I've had. And they were also goal oriented. They said, okay, this is what I picture. I'll move out of the house. This is what she can have. We'll sell the house this long or this many years, etc. So they have clear defined way of how they want to see it work out at the end.
Yeah.
But they're willing to like wiggle.
Yeah. They have a plan. It sounds like they have a North Star. They know in general where they want to go. And there is some acceptance and fairness that is built into that. They understand, like, hey, they understand there's empathy. It sounds like too, like, I understand how much this woman brought to the marriage. Was I the best leader? And did I make mistakes? Obviously I did. And so how can we peacefully and me treat this person like a human, even though this is a, terrible experience?
Yeah. I would say that was like, there's about 5 guys I can put in this like category. I see them, like I can see them. And that was the common
5 out of 1,000.
No, not 1,000, but there's particular, and I have so much respect for them, but they were easygoing, business minded, but emotional, but I will say that thinking about emotionally intelligent as well, or willing, they were coachable. So when I said, hey, maybe interacting with your daughter in this way isn't the best. Like, why don't you try this with her? Why don't you try that? Because like some coaching would start infiltrating my, my lawyering, and like now coaching is infiltrating my mediation. So the coaching would come in and I would see them grow as a father or even grow as a husband and start communicating. Like, this is like helping them with their communication. Like, well, maybe if you communicate this way as opposed to this way, you're going to get more of a response from your wife. The coachable ones too were good clients.
Yeah. Amazing. That's so good. That is so insightful. Wendy, I want to just give a call to action, but like when people come work with you, I know you work primarily with women. Who's the best client? Like if someone wants to know more about what you're doing and they haven't read the book, but they just heard you speak today and they're like, man, I love this woman. I want to learn more about what she's up to. Like who's like the best person that you typically work with and that they should come see you?
Yeah, so I'd say there's like two buckets. My first bucket started with like other lawyer moms, because as I started to have my awakening, I would say, like, I realized I can help other lawyer moms do the same thing. So any lawyer mom that might be listening to like the podcast or watching the show, like, oh, like I feel stuck. I don't know how to get out of this hole, but I know I need to get out. And yeah, that book looks really cool, but I don't want to do that work by myself. That it could be like that person. And the same also, people are like, wow, personal development sounds awesome. I would have always wanted to work with a coach, but like that idea scares me and it's too woo woo. Because sometimes people like talk to life coaches, like me too. Like when I'm like interviewing coaches and everything they say is so cool and philosophical and like poetic. And I'm like, wow. But I get off the call and I'm like, but I like, now what? Like, what do I do with this? Like talking about like the grit. It's like kind of like sparkle and like cool and neat and like great philosophies. But I didn't know what to do with it. So what I would say is I'm extremely practical in terms of, okay, you work with me and we're going to sit down what your homework is. And this is what you're going to do by the next time we talk. And then I get to see my people actually making changes. So I would say people willing to be in groups of other women or, the attorney moms.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you can be such a powerful coach because again, just your background in just mediating through some of the toughest and most tumultuous situations, but also finding ways to bring out the best in people, right? And get them clear on what their goal is. Like that's really hard to do in that process. So if you can do that for them, then of course you can do that for others.
Yeah. And that and being a classic silver lining finder, it's hard to say, like that helped me a lot in the divorce world, and it helps me in the coaching world as well, but in the divorce world and the mediation, saying like, look, like I know it stinks so bad you're gonna not see your kids as much, right? Like living in it, like they're living in it, they're living in like that terribleness. I'm like, but like you kind of always wanted a break, or like you always wanted to go like see your sister out in California or this other time, and it's like guilt-free time off. Like you don't even have to feel bad being away from your kids. Like of course they need to be with the other parents. So like take that time to really rest and recharge, or like go hog wild at work. But like there is a silver lining there. So I think that's another thing I was good at in the litigation context, and I try and help now in the mediation.
Yeah, so cool. Amazing stuff. Wendy Meadows, where can people connect with you, find out more about what you're up to? Is it your website? Is it Instagram? Where should they go find out and learn more about
LinkedIn? I'm doing this like LinkedIn challenge. I'm trying to be on LinkedIn and Facebook. I still love Facebook. I try to love Instagram, and I love Instagram stories, but where people are going to see the most out of me is following me on Facebook or LinkedIn.
Okay, amazing. Wendy Meadows, author, Sparkle and Grit. Go pick up the book and go check her out on LinkedIn or Facebook. Appreciate you so much. Thanks for being on.